Hello, Stephen. How are you?
Great. Hey, Dan. Hi, Michelle. Nice to see you both.
Hello. Good to see you.
Welcome to episode 51. And little announcement, Stephen is joining the show as our resident cat behavior expert. So welcome, Stephen.
Thank you. Thank you for having me
So
again.
you're not a guest anymore.
Fantastic.
You're our expert because you have letters after your name, and neither of us have letters after our name.
That's okay.
I mean, podcast host, PH, that sounds too scientific. But that being said, this is episode 51. We wanted to have this episode because I think coping with loss is a very important topic. And both Michelle and I coped with loss in 2024, having both lost cats that meant something and still mean something to us. But before we get into the main topic, I wanted to kind of start with a more lighthearted question, just to kind of ease us into the episode. Mostly because I have 47 cats. Only a couple of actually just 6 of only a handful of my cats, or a pawful, do this thing, and I wanted to get your input on it as our resident cat behavior expert. So I'm putting you on the spot immediately. So Sophie does this, Mona does this, and Taylor does this. They take the dry food out of the bowl onto the floor and eat it that way, as opposed to just eating it from the bowl. They will lay flat in front of the bowl, scoop the food out, and then eat it off the floor. I'm wondering why they do this and not why. Is there anything to cause that, or are they just being annoying?
So there are reasons for everything. It's the mystery is trying to discern why a cat does a certain thing. Because I like to joke that I send emails to all the cats that I encounter, and they never write me back. And so the way in which we try and figure out why a cat does something is by observation and inference and comparison, and then sometimes studies and this and that. But here's some thoughts. There is the possibility that the cat is just being playful. Catching mice is, predatory behavior is also kind of play behavior. And cats like to, there is a theory, a hypothesis, that the reason why cats play with a live mouse is to tire it out so that it's less likely to bite the cat and inflict some sort of bacterial infection or injury. So they try and, wear the mouse down before they actually get their mouth next to it and inflict a fatal bite. So maybe they're playing with their food. Maybe that's connected to a predatory process. Maybe they're trying to protect their food from the vague thought that someone else wants to eat their food. And so those are some reasons why a cat might do that. But it's partly unknown. There's only so much I can say on that particular topic, but I will, also mention that cats, we sometimes see cats after meals. They seem to be digging on your kitchen floor or wherever you're feeding your cats. And we think that is related to something called caching, spelled Caching. Did I spell that right? Caching?
Sounds right.
Which is the concept that a lot of wild cats do, which is they bury their food in order to save it for a later time. And we think that when cats are doing this, that it's essentially related to that idea. They're just not getting anywhere because there's no soil.
I always thought that was expressing dissatisfaction. I didn't realize, because my Tucker will sometimes, if he eats on the kitchen table, he'll take a placemat and put it over his bowl. I assumed that's why you're our resident cat behavior expert. I assumed incorrectly that meant he was dissatisfied with the brand.
He puts a placemat over the bowl?
He will take the placemat and put it over the bowl and then leave. And I took that to mean, this is a bad brand, get me something better. I'm dissatisfied with the quality of the service tonight. I'm leaving a
But
bad
you,
Yelp review.
you know what's funny, Dan? As a woman that goes to bars frequently or has throughout my life, that's actually something that women do to protect our drinks when we turn our backs on our drinks or when we run to the bathroom. If we don't have a friend that's nearby, we'll take not a placemat but a napkin and put it over our drink. It's a couple of things. It's to protect the drink, but it's also a sign to the bartender not to take it, that I'm not done with it. But it also stops somebody, or makes it more difficult for somebody to drop a roofie in it or something to that effect. So it kind of goes back to what Stephen was saying about protecting the food. Like you bury it to protect it and you kind of cover it.
Michelle, I'm curious, how do you know that someone simply doesn't just pluck the napkin off your drink?
You don't. And it's a simple thing, but it's just kind of, it's almost like putting a club on your car. It's really not going to stop them from taking the car, but it'll take them that extra 5 seconds to get it off of there, that maybe somebody will see them doing it. Maybe it's a slight bit of a deterrent,
It certainly tells them that you're paying attention.
That's right. Yeah.
But
we both assumed incorrectly. So thank you.
But I would prefer to think in a certain way that our cats are expressing dissatisfaction. It's more amusing, but I think that's not the case. Failure to eat the food is a clear sign of dissatisfaction. If they go, what are you trying to serve me?
What's your thoughts along the lines of food? So, I have 2 cats and I have 2 different food bowls I put out, both soft food. Right now I have a little kitten and I have my adult. So I have kitten food for the kitten and I have adult food for the adult. They will start off in their respective bowls, have a couple of bites, and then swap. Go to the other bowls, have a couple of bites, swap, go back to the other bowls, have a couple of bites. And previously, even when it was the 2 adult cats, I had the same food, and they would do that same exact behavior. It's the same food in the 2 bowls, but they would just swap back and forth.
Irma Bombeck and the grass is always greener, right? So if your question is this okay?
I mean, it's just strange. It's just fascinating. Like, it's very curious,
I mean, because at least to what I imagined your question was, there's no kitten food in nature, right? There's just plenty of it.
Yeah.
So really with kittens, we want to make sure they're getting a lot of food many times a day, depending on how young they are.
Yeah.
And then they should be okay.
Okay, so now we've eased in to the main event, which is coping with loss. And
right on cue.
I think I just heard somebody.
That was Delilah.
And the first, when you and I kind of planned out the episode, you suggested that there's more than one type of coping and there's more than one type of loss. So kind of the first half, or the first loss to cope with, which strikes home for Michelle and I, is loss from illness, from a terminal illness. So to kind of begin the discussion, I guess finding out that how do you find out your cat is ill, or what are the early signs to look for? Because every vet has told me cats are masters at hiding their illness. So what are the signs to look for that you recommend to people?
So before I actually answer that, and by the way, disclaimer, I am not a vet. So I cannot give any medical advice, but I can just offer my opinion as a person as to what might be going on. But before I even go there, I want to just back up and say and mention that for all the people who are listening to this or will be listening to this, there's a good chance they've either been through loss or are going to go through it at some point. And I just want to voice, having been through it myself and having counseled people on it in different ways and encountered it in many different ways, I just want to offer my compassionate thoughts to all of these folks. This is one of the hardest things you can go through. In some respects, it might actually be harder than the loss of a human, simply because in many cases there's no baggage associated with our animal companions. It's as pure a relationship as you can often have. And I just wanted to just let everyone know that the 3 of us here are, I think, all on the same page in expressing our compassionate solidarity with folks. So, to your question, right, they can be good at disguising the fact that they're ill, but there are some basic things that you can look for. It's not that they necessarily completely hide the symptoms of an illness, but they are subtle at it. So we want to look at things like eating and drinking. right? That they are eating normally, drinking well, that they are eliminating correctly, right? They're going to the bathroom in the way in which we normally see them do this, that they are alert and engaged with the world and are not doing things like posturing, where they hold a body position where you might be seeing some stress or some rigidity or a body position that's not normal, or they can't relax, or they're sleeping in a or resting, they're existing in a part of your home that they don't normally hang out in. As an example, the first sign that one of my first cats was sick was she was sitting upright in a hallway that he never sat in. And then on closer examination, I saw that his mouth was open and he was doing some open mouth breathing. And that was when I knew I had to take him to the vet, right then. So those are some ways, changes in behavior, changes in eating and drinking and eliminating are all things to watch out for. Subtle signs that they are tense, for reasons that don't make any sense. They might appear to be stressed when there doesn't appear to be a stressor, or depressed or lethargic. And one way to catch a lot of illnesses early, if you don't mind my just jumping into that, is having a digital baby scale in your home. And
a digital baby scale.
Digital babies. When you go to the vet, there's a scale on the table and they plop your cat down on the scale. This measures it measures fractions of an ounce, right? It's extremely precise. And a lot of cats lose weight before they show symptoms of being sick. They can lose weight from diabetes, from hyperthyroidism, from heart disease, from cancer, from any number of metabolic or other disorders. And the thing is, if your cat might need to lose a pound or two before you can see it with your own eyes, a cat that loses an ounce at a time is telling you something that you can't see. So, and the way in which this works is you get a baseline measurement for your cat. You keep a little logbook, and once a week or once every 2 weeks, you do a weight. And it's going to go up and down as a function of natural variation. So what vets always told me was that if you get 3 consecutive losses in a row, no matter how small the loss, it could be 1 ounce this week, 1 ounce next week, and 1 ounce the week after that, then you have a trend, and that may indicate a medical problem, and you can go to the vet and you catch it much sooner than you would otherwise.
That's a very good, an idea that I have never heard before. I think that's a wonderful suggestion. I'm going to get one.
Yeah, absolutely.
$40. And if you have trouble with your cat getting on the scale, you can weigh a carrier and then place them in the carrier and weigh them in the carrier and subtract the weight of it. By the way, inflammatory bowel disease, which I've had 2 cats, including one currently, have that illness. Weight loss is a classic symptom of inflammatory bowel, but again, that weight loss is often slow at the beginning and you might not catch it.
So overall, just changes in their routine is something to look out for. Like at first, changes in what they do day to day. Is that a good first sign to look for?
Yeah. As an example, sometimes cats, they're alert, but you go and pet them and you go into a kind of like a petting session and they calm down and they get soft and they lay down. And if you're doing this with your cat and they're not capable of calming down in the way in which in the way that might indicate that there's a medical issue. Could be other things. You have to look at it in context, right? If there's a fire engine going past your window, that doesn't count. But subtle changes in behavior, demeanor, energy, all good things to look at and watch for.
And sort of how long after you notice these things, this is probably an obvious question, but I think should still be asked for who would be listening. At what point should you seek out a vet when you start to notice these things? At what point should you bring this cat to the vet?
And I'm not a vet, so I have to be, again,
right,
just
with the disclaimer.
My kind of my personal opinion, but it's a great question. We have people who foster for us at the animal care centers where I work, and wherever if you foster cats, the foster department is used to people calling at Sunday at 9:00 at night because the cat just threw up, and they think it's an emergency when the cat just threw up. So distinguishing between what's urgent and what's not urgent can be helpful. A single episode of vomiting is typically not particularly concerning, but what if it's vomits or vomiting with loss of energy or change to demeanor or body language? Then it's more serious. A cat who has a cold and sneezes a little bit of blood out of their nose, this happens every day for cats who have colds. It's not a big deal. Breathing problems is a big deal. Open mouth breathing is a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
Panting is a big deal. Blood, generally, bleeding in any kind of obvious way is a big deal. Significant changes to demeanor or body language are significant. It's hard to explain in the sense that it's all about context with how you know your cat. If your cat is not acting normally, then it's time to see a vet. The question becomes, do you go see a vet after hours and go to an emergency vet? Or do you get an appointment the next day at your vet? And I don't even really, other than obvious signs of serious illness, I don't even want to try and answer that question because I don't feel like there's a good answer that might be misinterpreted. So I don't really want to go there.
Yeah, that would be a case-by-case basis, more of a decision. So yeah, we'll say the disclaimer, but disclaimer, we're not vets, I'm calling on your experience in your profession and more of a behavioral approach to these questions, not a medical approach to these questions. And in your, again, not as a vet, but in your experience counseling people and in your experience with ACC, and you just said fostering, is there a disease or is there a leading cause of illness as cats get older that you've noticed, again, not as a vet, but as just you in your profession in terms of behavior? Is there a leading illness that causes death in cats as they get older that you've noticed?
And actually one other thing I want to mention, and that's vocalization.
Mm-hmm.
Cats who are vocalizing and there's no obvious reason why they're vocalizing, that's also a concern. Sure. So one of the weakest organs in a cat are their kidneys. There are theories or hypotheses as to why that's the case, but I've had plenty of vets tell me, and I've certainly observed it to some extent, that if nothing else gets your cat, kidney disease kind of catches up with all cats eventually. So that's a big thing, but so is cancer, heart disease to some extent. I think that's to a lesser extent. But to my mind, cancers, kidney disease are bigger causes for pet cats, for cats who live with us. Other things obviously come into play as well, but farther down on the list.
Well, that was kidney disease was what my cat, the one that I had to put down last year, what really took him out was the kidney disease. On top of that, prior to the kidney disease, he had the hyperthyroidism. So he had what you talk about, the random vocalizations, and he had been dealing with that for a couple of years. We were trying to get it diagnosed. Eventually, the vet determined that that's what it must have been. But he had that right up until he passed those vocalizations. But yeah, that kidney disease, when I finally brought him in, when he was losing the weight. I mean, he was so skinny. He was a big cat and he was so skinny. And I brought him in, and it was maybe just a few months since the last time I was in, and he was at stage 3 kidney failure. Like he was already, far gone. Like it came on quickly, or seemed to come on quickly, from one visit to the next. And it was pretty rough, but that's what took him. And obviously Dan just dealt with the cancer. Previous cat that I had passed from respiratory disease. She had respiratory infections throughout her life, and then she had like a really bad infection that she was about 20. So she was up in age, and so she passed from that. And one of my mom's previous cats died from heart failure. So everything that you just mentioned, we've experienced.
Yeah, that definitely fits with my experience as well.
And, with respect to kidney disease, that's why everyone in the kind of animal welfare community likes to push wet food for cats, because it's got more water, and water flushes kidneys and helps keep them healthy. So figuring out how to get your cat to drink lots of water is a good thing.
Little tagging on to what you just said about drinking and water. Do you recommend people to get water fountains? Because that's exclusively what I have in my home. I literally have 6 cats, and they each have access to their own fountain. Do you recommend
Sure.
fountains?
Yeah, absolutely. What I really recommend, and this goes to the current progressive thinking on feeding and watering our cats, which is different watering stations. Cats like to seek out different places to get food and to get water. And I have water bowls all over for our cats. And cats, we also think they like moving sources of water. And the reason we think that is because a moving source of water in nature is less likely to be stagnant, and stagnant water is more likely to be contaminated with stuff that they don't want to eat. So fountains have moving water. It's like a brook, a babbling brook. Fountains, I always want 2 things in a fountain: super easy to clean and super quiet, because some of them are not easy to clean. They've got lots of nooks and crannies, and they collect green scum, and they're hard to clean, and you won't use them. But yes, absolutely, I totally recommend fountains.
And along the lines of our first question, 3 of my cats will put their paw in the water before they drink it. In fact, my Foster, she's been here a year, she will drink from her paw. She'll eventually take a sip from the fountain, but she prefers to put her feet, lick her paw, put her feet, lick her paw. I've actually posted it on the show's TikTok because with a country song called "People Say I Have a Drinking Problem," because my Tucker will test the water, he'll dig the water, and then he'll drink normally. Mona will just kind of dip her paw in the water, make sure it's the right temperature, like I should give her a thermometer. But Rosie, my Foster, who, pardon my French, has seen some shit, and that's why she is very jittery, and I'm still working with her a year later. She will literally drink from, like I should give her a straw. So it just, when you said they each seek different sources of water, I have 6, they all drink differently. They all have different drinking habits. Some guzzle, some take a sip. It's just fascinating to just watch, and they never drink from the same fountain. They kind of rotate through the house. Tucker has one that's his favorite, but the rest of mine, they will rotate around the fountain. So I found that, as an aside, I found that fascinating. So we've determined there's something wrong. We've brought the cat to the vet. I would imagine the people that you counsel, I would imagine they've sent you messages. Oh my God, there's something going on. What should I do? And I would imagine you've recommended get them to the vet. And there's levels of illness, from it's just a quick infection that an antibiotic can fix, up to what Michelle and I have dealt with. So I'm very curious on how you counsel people in coping with the different levels of illness, from surmountable to insurmountable. I guess we could start with, you assume the worst, it turns out to be something that can be easily treated, to what I went through with Sophie, where it was terminal. How do you counsel people on how to cope with that? Because am I correct in assuming that's part of what you counsel?
Sometimes I do more counseling on people who may need to surrender a cat, but I have counseled people in different types of loss and with illnesses. And, the first thing I would say is always recommend a vet. There is no profit in not recommending a vet. You can't win that way. I mean, yeah, maybe the cat's not really sick and they had a visit that wasn't super necessary, but what if it went the other way?
Yeah.
And you counseled them not to go to a vet and the cat was really sick. So my default is always to say, go to a vet and listen to yourself and listen to your cat. I had one friend whose beloved cat developed feline infectious peritonitis, which at the time was 100% fatal. Now there is a extremely expensive medication that can save a cat with FIP.
That's good.
But at the time, it was uniformly 100% fatal, the wet version being more quickly fatal. And that's what her cat had. And she found a vet who discovered a vitamin supplement that could save her cat. And it was going to be thousands of dollars. And she called me asking for advice. And I said to her, there is no vitamin mixture that's going to save your cat. This vet is trying to fleece you out of lots of money while your cat suffers a painful, and it is, if you let it go to its conclusion, a painful end of life condition. And she's kind of going back and forth with me, and I'm kind of pushing harder and harder that this is not the right thing to do. And finally, I kind of got a little bit frustrated, and I actually said to her, why are you asking me all of this when you seem to want to go spend this money on this vitamin infusion? And there was a pause. And then she said, because I want you to tell me to euthanize my cat. And she did. And it was the right thing to do. But that was a really tough conversation to have. I'm not really answering your question. Michelle, you want to get in?
Yeah, so, well, when I first got this little kitten, she was a rescue from the street. So tiny, less than 3 pounds, super tiny, super frail, didn't look healthy at all. And within the first few days that I got her, I took her to the first night at a 24-hour vet to give like an overall assessment. Didn't seem to have much, fatal or whatever that was wrong with her. Fleas, malnourished, dehydrated, all that kind of stuff. But in the first glance, looked like she was okay. And then I brought her to my proper vet a couple of days later, and the kitten's belly was so bloated that the proper vet gave me that possible diagnosis of FIP. And I was beside myself because I had just gotten this kitten. I fell in love with her the moment I saw her. And then what she told me was that it was, and this is, a couple months ago, this was October. So she's like, and there really is no cure. She was telling me that I guess there had been some sort of black market association that had gotten something from
a drug from China,
elsewhere.
I believe, that was not being imported, and people were going through back channels to get it. But now you can actually get it.
Now you can actually get it here. So that's great. Because I was mortified at the thought that I wouldn't have even had a chance to be with this kitten more than I had never heard of that before that time. So it was pretty shocking to hear that there was really no cure for it. But fortunately, we did blood work and she came back. She's negative. She does not have that. So like I literally cried like with relief when I heard that she didn't have that, because she's such an adorable little monster and she deserves a chance to live for a little while, So
we put our hopes and our dreams and our love and our emotions onto the cat who gives it back to us. And when that's taken away, all of those hopes, dreams, and emotions get stripped away.
Yep.
Well, kind of building on that point, when you find out that there's a very good chance that the diagnosis is a terminal or will be terminal, or the big concern that I went through with Sophie, obviously vets are expensive, and the reason why I haven't had a vet on the show yet is because I'm afraid I will go off on a rant, and I don't want to do that. And that is, forgive me.
Hello.
Say hi to Vance. Vance, sweetie pie, we're recording. You're facing the wrong way. That way. Look that way. I'm sorry. Vance, you have impeccable timing. I'll talk to you later. Vets are expensive, and if I had a vet on the show, and I've spoken to a few, I've kind of semi-invited them, but I'm concerned, given my recent experience, that I'll go off on a rant and it'll become a horrible argument type of show. But balancing what the vet recommends to do as possible courses of action, like with Sophie had a little, and Sophie's the background, by the way. Sophie had a little pimple on her face that even Michelle noticed in September. Within the space of 48 hours, it ballooned to the size of an olive. Right as Taylor recovered from his dental issues, which is what I was going through when we last recorded. And the vet, as soon as I brought Sophie to the vet, the diagnosis was either 2 types of cancer, endo something or other, or carcinoma. She was leaning towards squamous cell carcinoma. And she said, this is at an advanced stage. You can put her through, an oncologist and testing and blood work to determine what this is, but I don't think the end result of doing all that and spending all that money will benefit her beyond maybe giving her a few more weeks. So it was the way, it was this thing in 48 hours. The vet said this is a serious form of cancer. There are paths you can go down, but they will all lead to a dead end, if you pardon the expression. How do you cope with? Because in my experience, every time I've had to face this, and this is 4 times in a quarter century of cat ownership, each time it comes as a very sudden thing. Like with this, it was in 48 hours. With my tiger, Hurricane Sandy basically gave him a heart attack. And he developed heart issues. This is what the vet told me, that the stress of recovering from the hurricane, I was the only one with power. Everyone was coming over to my house. Apparently, the stress of that exacerbated a heart condition that was underlying. But in every instance, it wasn't like gradually happening over a period of months. It was all of a sudden, 2 days ago, they're fine. 2 days later, the vet says, you're facing the end very, very soon. And in one case, it was that day, it was such a severe case that I had to euthanize on the spot. How do you cope with being kind of hit like that, is what I'm very curious about your take on. How do you cope with, or how do you advise people on how to cope with being hit with this whammy?
So before I answer that question, I want to go off on 2 quick tangents and then reel me back in.
Try.
One is I have a lot of vets who are friends of mine, and I work with a lot of vets, and I have a lot of compassion for vets. They have the highest suicide rate of any profession in the country.
Really?
And yes,
I stand corrected.
They overtook dentists a few years ago. Any vet will tell you they know a vet who's committed suicide, probably, or at least many. And I know vets who've had this experience, who've known other vets who've killed themselves. So I think it's a really tough profession, and a lot of the costs associated with it are with corporate takeovers of vet practices. So that's one tangent I just wanted to put out there. Secondly, I forgot to mention this with respect to figuring out if your cat is sick. And that is, I think a lot of people make benign conflations, is that a word?
Mm-hmm.
Between coincidental events and what's happening with their cat. In other words, I just took my cat on a trip and we just came back from the beach and now he's having a breathing problem. It's probably, the thing we did outside. Or I switched his food last week and now all of a sudden something's happening. And, it might be food related. But anyway, it's important not to just go, oh, it's this little thing.
Mm.
And to try and not just come up with a benign reason for what that changes.
Very, very good point.
To your question, Dan, help me for a second. Remind me the question. I'm so sorry.
How do you cope with being, and again, I stand corrected. I didn't mean to. I have respected a lot of vets, but the cost is what is a big problem. It's a big problem with a lot of people. So how do you cope with being hit with the whammy of you weren't expecting this, or you didn't think the signs you noticed that led you to bring your cat to the vet would be met with news that your cat does not have long to live, which is what I was met with Sophie.
I don't know. As a person who's gone through this, and one of my cats, Cricket, has almost died twice from sudden and shocking conditions that in one case provoked a kind of existential sense of fear in me. I felt that not only was she dying, but that I was dying. We were dying together. So as a human being, I don't have a vet that you trust and like and have good communication with, I think is super important, because in these moments of emergency, essentially, you need a vet you can trust and that you can talk to and who can advise you on courses of action that are open to you. From a financial point of view, sometimes having pet insurance is helpful. And maybe you can put a link to this in the published version of this podcast, but there's a good website called petinsurancereview.com. And it's a clearinghouse for different pet insurances. Everyone has to pay up front, and pre-existing conditions are often not covered, and dentals are not often not covered. Good plans, there are good plans, and there are plans that are not as good. So that's one way to just cope with the financial aspect of it. But I think it's really upsetting and disturbing, and we need help from our vets, compassionate help to guide us in these moments that are just terrifying.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the compassion aspect is very important, because I always ask if this was your cat, what would you do? I always ask that question. What would you do? I asked that with Dr. Lotus. Shout out to Dr. Lotus from Garden City Park Animal Hospital. I said, what would you do? She said, I would start to say goodbye. She said, I wouldn't put her through the torture of oncologists unless you're dying to know exactly the cancer she has. I said, if it's going to end her life, I don't need to know with 100% certainty the name of what it is. All I know is it is something that is going to take her away from me. And she said, I agree with you. That's what I would do. I would just make her as comfortable as possible. So I agree with that. And what was the link again for the insurance? Just so that.
Yep. Pet Insurance Review.
Do you have insurance for your current cat?
Yes, I do.
Okay. That's something that I definitely, Sophie, I could not, because she had a pre-existing condition of her cancer, but it's something I'm going to look into for.
Some insurances will convert a pre-existing condition to a not a pre-existing condition after a period of time, like a year.
Because my Taylor is between 15 and 17, but after that, there's 12 down to 3, 11 down to 3 in terms of age. So I don't know about Taylor, because he has a heart murmur and he's also very cranky half the time and probably wouldn't even want it. But my others, I'm definitely going to look into it in very short order. So for situations where you're told you have weeks or your cat has weeks, and again, this is also, I don't think there's a perfect answer to this question, but your cat has a terminal illness, they have weeks or months to live. How do you counsel, or what is your opinion on knowing exactly what to look for knowing it's time to say goodbye? Because in my case, it was, with Sophie, it was take her home, keep her pain in control. And I was told, and I quote, you'll know when it's time. Is that something you can have an opinion on, can expand on when you, or what you counsel people? Because you talked about a case where it sounded like the person wanted your approval almost to euthanize. How do you counsel people in exactly when to make that decision? Because that's literally the worst, most painful decision I don't wish on my biggest enemy.
Right. So, I mean, there are 3 possibilities as you go through this, and that is that you end your cat's life too soon, earlier than necessary, more or less right on time, or too late. And that last one is the one we don't want to do at all. And I like to look at things, or talk about looking at things like demeanor, comfort, dignity, and interest in life. So can my cat eat and drink, get to the litter box on their own? Do they seem to have an interest in life, and are they comfortable? And if they start to get that faraway look in their eye, and they're losing mobility, or losing appetite, not eating, some combination of all these things add up to a cat who is preparing to leave this world without your help if you let them. And it may be kinder at that point to help them. It's the final gift that we can give. And so with your vet's advice, I remember when one of my cats was getting towards the end of an illness that took his life, my vet gave me her cell number. And I knew at that moment how serious it was, because she said, you can call anytime.
That's great.
Yeah. In fact, our blind girl, Jenny, is named after that vet.
I don't know, Michelle, I know you face this with legs, if there's any
Yeah.
kind of anything you want to interject with this very question. I don't want to hog the
Yeah,
phone.
I mean, it was, when I brought him in, I don't remember the specific timing of it. It was all kind of a bit of a blur, to be honest, from when I first got that diagnosis. And he was already kind of weak at that point. And, the vet had said, I think she gave him, if I remember correctly, she gave him a steroid shot, but she was like, she's at that she said, I think that he only has maybe about 2 weeks, from that point, and that I should start, preparing, to let him go and whatever. She gave him a shot that day and said, well, if he improves, then you can give him a little more time. But if he doesn't improve, then you should, consider coming back. So I kind of had, and I agreed with her, we were going to give it to Thursday. And if he had improved by Thursday, I'd give him a little bit more time. But if he didn't improve by that Thursday, then I would make the appointment to bring him in. And not only did he not improve by Thursday, he went so downhill. By Wednesday night, I knew I had to put him down on Thursday. Like, it was just, he couldn't walk. He could not make it to the toilet. He was peeing wherever he was. And in the morning, that Thursday morning, he made his way somehow to the bowl in the kitchen, and he literally was face planted in the bowl in the kitchen. That was, I'm like, I can't. I made an appointment and brought him in that afternoon. And they were so, Dan had a similar experience with his vet. Mine set it up, the timing a little bit differently, but it was similarly a caring experience where they gave me so much time to be with him in between each phase of the process, so they go in, they get that initial shot of, I guess it's the anesthesia or something that numbs them or the paralyzes them initially. And then while that sets in, they left. They gave me time to sit and be with him while he was, going into that mode. And then they gave him another shot, and then they left and gave me time to be with him. So like, I really got to have my last moments with him. And I was probably there for an hour, just going through and being with him and being able to say my goodbyes and to reconcile in my own head that he was gone. And it was hard, and I cried a lot that day, but it made it so much better to have those moments, because I've been in other situations. I had another cat, actually one that I adopted at the same time I had gotten legs. It was his brother who was ill when I got him, and we had to put him down within 6 months of being here. And I was at a different vet at the time. It was the last time I ever went to this vet. And we went in and asking, should we put him down? And of course, they don't want to tell you yes or no. Oh, only you can decide that. Okay. Well, yeah, but some info would be nice. But so we wound up, he was really not in a good place. So we wound up putting him down. And there was no comfort. There was no offer of, with Dan, you were able to get the clippings of the fur, and, I didn't get the clippings of the fur, but I got the paw print and, other things. And with this other vet, there was no offer of any of that. There was no, do you want to take a moment? Do you want to hold him? There was nothing. It was just, he gave him the initial shot. My mom was with me. We just stood there and watched him be paralyzed. And then that was it. And then, so we didn't get to have that goodbye time, that closure or anything that I had with this new vet that I'm at and that Dan had with his vet. And I found that to be incredibly comforting to have that time. Again, because it really was, it felt like it was so quick from when he got that diagnosis to when we had to make that ultimate choice. So
I've had similar experiences. I had my tiger, my orange cat, who had the heart condition. The vet who I trusted at the time, when he told me it's basically an emergency situation, I wouldn't recommend, we made the decision to euthanize. And he went to, he said, I'm going to give you a few moments with your cat and I'll come back. I heard him in the hallway say to his staff, okay, we got to go do this cat.
God.
I heard that. I was obviously the last time I went to that vet, but that, it was still, he took his time. It was nice, but just hearing that in the hallway on that day was I hate to use the term buzzkill, but it really just soured the experience.
Yeah.
To the point where I'm one of those, I'll write a bad review for people. I'm one of those. I wrote a review and the owner commented that vet is no longer with us. I don't know as a direct result of my experience or that vet had a rep of, not realizing the hallway had good acoustics. I don't know. But then from the polar opposite, when I helped Sophie cross the Rainbow Bridge, it could not have been a more beautiful experience for what is the most painful day. And Michelle, again, you were there, and I'll never be able to thank you enough. So I guess, again, building on this topic, the after effect, you come home with an empty carrier and you've made this decision, you've gone through that extremely, as beautiful as it is, it's still the most painful experience anybody could go through. I love that you say it's the last gift that you can give them.
Yeah.
And I like to think they look at you realizing you've given them that gift. I can't obviously guarantee that, but I feel like that's how Sophie looked at me as she crossed. And the vet, she took her time to cross the Rainbow Bridge. So the vet used the term, she's sniffing the roses on the bridge itself because it took her a while to cross the bridge. So that was the level of the compassion of this vet in this particular experience. She said, oh, she's just taking her time. She's sniffing around. She's not running across the bridge. She's walking slowly. And that definitely kind of eased the pain as it went along. How do you counsel people that, like I just said, come home with the empty carrier and cope with, the first few days, weeks after that loss?
Well, again, that's not something I do routinely. I'm more involved with people who are voluntarily giving up their cat as a pet parent,
That's
as a cat parent.
Next topic.
Yeah.
But I think everyone copes with this differently. It's a very empty feeling when you come home.
Yeah.
There seems to be nothing beautiful on this earth when you've come home after losing your cat. And when it's happened to me, we just live with it quietly and privately, although sometimes, we reach out to friends in different ways. It's hard, Dan. I remember, if I can give you a quick story, I used to teach volunteers how to do adoptions at ASPCA. I would teach them the process at that organization. And every time I met with a group of trainees, they would ask me how many cats I had. And we had just lost Simon. So we went from 2 to 1. And in 3 or 4 days after we lost Simon, I was scheduled to teach a class. And they said, you don't have to teach it. We can find, I was a volunteer. I just was a volunteer who trained other volunteers. And they said, we can find someone else. And I was like, no, I can do this. I need to get out of the house. And I prepared myself for the question that I knew was coming. How many cats do you have? I was mentally ready for this. And when I got there were like 5 young women standing in front of me, kind of being introduced to me. And behind them was, did I ever tell you this story before? I hope I'm not repeating myself.
No, I don't think so.
Behind them was the volunteer director, the director of volunteers. And she obviously knew what I'd been through. And the question obviously came up. One of them said, so Stephen, how many cats do you have? And the director of the program, Laura, made locked eye contact. An entire conversation flew between us in that one instance. But I was ready. And I looked at that volunteer and I smiled, this big smile. And I said, I have 1. And I never let on. I still get emotional when I tell that story, but at the time, it was perfect. And I never let on and she never knew. But it's all very personal. And I think people should feel their feelings, feel their emotions, and not be talked to by other people who in ways that aren't helpful. Like, when are you going to get another cat? You should never say that to someone, ever.
Yeah.
And when they're ready to get another cat, you'll be the first to know, or they will make it known. That is not something that we discuss. If you lost your child, would you say, when are you going to get pregnant again?
Some people do, Stephen. Some people do.
Seriously?
I've heard, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I didn't even have that question really, is when to get the next one. That's not something that everybody feels differently.
But the reason I told that story, Dan, was I think that the way in which we process our emotions and our grief is by reliving the things that matter, by telling our stories over and over again, and allowing us to feel those feelings even years later. That reminds us that we're human and that we've had loss and that we've had love. And that is a natural coping mechanism that is as lovely as it can be under the circumstances.
That's literally why we have this show. I started blogging stories from my first cat, Tyler, who is still better than any of your cats ever will be. And
It's not a competition.
I dare you to challenge me on that, or I'll end the recording. He was just an extraordinary cat who connected with me on a level that I have never connected with another human being. So I just wanted to write the stories. And when you said that, that resonated with me, because that's literally how we are at this point now. Is this started as a blog of his stories, and it's like, oh, those are cute stories. Can we get more? And it kind of ballooned from there, just to keep the memory alive and reliving. Once the pain goes away, you can relive. You could go back into those memories and live them without them hurting. Once the initial pain of the loss goes away, I could remember and tell the stories like Michelle, the Bananas Foster story I've told a few times with Tyler, where he drank the sauce of Bananas Foster at a pool party once and got drunk and passed out from it for a few days. I could tell these stories and not, break down, because they're just funny stories. So now that's one type of loss. So now we're going to literally turn the page. And this is a type of loss I have no experience with. But as you've alluded to, you counsel people on this a lot, which is the loss of a cat, not through illness, but you facing the difficult choice of having to rehome the cat, or it just reaches a point where it's not working out and it's best for you two to part company. So again, as with illness, what are the signs to look out for, or what are the situations that arise that can lead down this road towards this is not going to work out in the end, and this cat might have to find a new home?
So I don't have to tell anyone they need to surrender their cat. In fact, it's not something that's generally appropriate. People will figure out on their own when that's the right decision to make. But there are different reasons why people surrender. And maybe I could just talk briefly about that and see where that takes us. There are a lot of people who surrender cats because of life changes that can't be avoided. These are often heartbreaking moments in people's lives. Someone becomes allergic or loses a job or loses their home, or there's someone dies, someone passes away, and they can't keep their cat. Other times there is a mismatch between their cat's personality, temperament, demeanor, energy level, and what they're looking for, or some combination of that. A lot of rescue groups talk about getting a forever home.
Yes.
Spelled FURREVER, right? And I don't use that term because I don't really believe in it in the same way, perhaps on the same level that some people do, which is that I think of this as companionship, that from an adoption point of view, we're trying to matchmake. We're trying to find the best match between the cat and the people so that the cat has a good time and the people have a good time. I use the good time as a metaphor for all the things that are good. And if it's not a good match, then it's not going to work out, and it becomes difficult and challenging. And why should that person just endure what is not a good match when we can make a better match for that cat? The shelter and shelters do this. If a cat comes back, we take what we've learned and we apply it to the next adoption. As an example, there's a gentleman who's in the process of surrendering a cat who is just wildly too much energy for him and has just too many needs on that level. And it's just him by himself, one guy. I make this analogy that if there was a family with, 5 kids, all active teenagers, and everyone's high energy, and they might be a perfect fit for this cat. Meanwhile, that family with 5 kids or 3 kids, whatever, has this couch potato cat who doesn't move, doesn't play, and they're all bored with the cat, and it's not working out for them. Both of these families, they've got the wrong cat. All they need to do is switch, and both cats would be super happy, and both families would be super happy. So I come from a point of view of trying to find the right match, and if to the extent that it might not be a perfect match, helping them behaviorally to help the cat be happier and help them be happier. But that's kind of my general approach to it. I don't know if I'm answering your question.
No, absolutely. I guess, is there again, we're going to do the disclaimer one more time. We're not vets. We're not experts. We're not telling you what to do in this show. We're just how we cope with these situations, and your situation may vary. Is there a percentage of you're faced with somebody who comes to you for your help, the cat is not a match, or there's a behavioral issue? Is there a percentage of success where the advice you give works out and they don't face the point of having to rehome? Is there a lot of kind of steps that they could try? Is when you advise them, and it's not working out, it is of my opinion that this cat should find a better home. Is this after being exhausting all options, or does that depend on the situation? I'm coming at this with no experience, so that's why I'm curious.
And I generally don't say to people, I think you should surrender your cat as a rule. I want people to come to that decision on their own. But in some cases, I might say to someone, a reason to engage in an in-depth behavior program might be so that at the end of it, if it doesn't work out, you can say you tried everything. And that can assuage feelings of guilt that, I didn't try everything. Other people don't need to do that. And that's okay. That's fine. I would never say to someone, you need to try this so that you can say that you tried everything. That's a personal decision that someone makes on their own. If you decide it's not the right match today, then it's not the right match. If you decide you need a month to give it your best shot, then that's also great. It comes down to, because as we've talked a little bit about this off camera, there are 3 primary emotions people have when they are surrendering a cat that they love. There are feelings of failure, there are feelings of guilt, and there are feelings of loss or grief. And I don't believe in pretty much just about any case where we're dealing with reasonable people in reasonable situations that there should be feelings of failure or guilt. We do the best we can. We make the best decisions that we can. And ultimately, if you decide that the match between you and this cat is not the right match, then you're making an affirmative choice on behalf of that cat, a positive, proactive choice to help that cat have a better life in a home that's a better match. That's a good thing. That's not failure. And there should be no guilt. And feelings of guilt or failure can prolong feelings of grief.
Yeah.
And complicate feelings of grief. And so I want people to be able to go through the grieving stage as naturally and as easily as they can. So I'm trying my best to help feel okay, because they should, yes, they feel bad on many levels, but a shelter and someone who works in a shelter should never be trying to get someone, to pressure someone into keeping a cat or feeling badly about surrendering that cat, because then you're just feeding into their feelings of guilt and failure. And that's a terrible thing to do to someone. And so if any, rescue group or shelter or organization tries to tell you they don't want to take the cat back, that you should work it out, that's not a compassionate thing.
Is there a length of time that these situations arise from adopting the cat to reaching the point where this is not a good match, or does that depend on the cat?
Depends on the cat, depends on the people. I got an email on a Sunday night from a prospective new client. I don't normally just write back on a Sunday night. I mean, I might, but Monday morning is okay, right? And I got this email and I said, I have to call these people on the phone. Their cat was attacking them viciously. And this was a friendly cat. And one of the most heart-wrenching things in situations like these is when a otherwise very friendly cat goes basically crazy and starts randomly attacking you. And I said to them in advance of a full counseling session the next day, I said to them that the decision point in a situation like this from not wanting to surrender to surrendering can happen without any advance notice. I gave them the best advice I could that night, but by the next day, the cat had attacked them again, and they made the decision that they had to just surrender the cat. And I continued to counsel them through that process, but there was no time for them, no time left. I'm helping clients right now in a similar situation where the cat may have a medical condition called hyperesthesia syndrome, feline hyperesthesia syndrome. And they're in a big enough house that they can keep the cat in a finished basement and feed the cat through the door. The male member of the couple he's able to go down and interact with the cat briefly and clean the litter box and then retreat. But this cat is still randomly becoming very aggressive. And they have a consultation coming up with a board certified veterinary behaviorist, their own, highly specialized person who's a medical professional. But they have more time because they have the option of keeping the cat comfortable in a different room. When you're in a 1-bedroom apartment in New York City, you don't have a lot of options.
What's the name of that syndrome again?
Feline hyperesthesia syndrome. Maybe, Dan, I could give you a link. We could link to it afterwards.
Sure.
It's a complicated, not well understood condition. It's called the skin rippling disease. It's sometimes thought of as kind of like a seizure disorder, usually involves esthesia. It comes from the Greek, which means sensitivity. And hyperesthesia means hypersensitivity. Yeah. And these cats often are very, very sensitive to types of touch around the base of their tail. They often mutilate their own tails or the base of their own tails. Their skin ripples. They get this faraway look. They almost go into a trance, and then they can either run around and be crazy, and then they spontaneously recover and everything's okay, or they can become randomly aggressive. Yeah. And then spontaneously recover. And it requires a vet's diagnosis, and it's usually diagnosed by excluding other things and going, this is what's left.
I had a cat that did that basically what you described with the first people that called you on the Sunday night, where she just seemed to snap like one evening. I was in a 1-bedroom apartment, but it was a decent sized apartment, and a friend was visiting, and by the time we were getting ready to leave, she was just attacking both of us. And then we went, okay, let's give her some time, went to the movies, came back. I couldn't even open the door. I went to open the door crack, and she was sitting right at the door, and just looked up and just hissed like the meanest hiss. Got food, threw a little food in there. It was like a peace offering. Didn't matter. Next day, I wound up calling the vet to see. I'm like, I don't know what's going on with this cat. I have no idea. She wasn't fixed yet at that point, so we got her fixed, and that calmed her down like a little bit. But then she never really quite was like 100% herself again. I didn't give her up, but it became from that point forward where during that time period, she wanted nothing to do with me. Like, I remember coming into the house and I had to, like a lion tamer, I had a pillow and a blanket, and I would keep the door closed at night because I was afraid she was going to attack me in the middle of the night and keep her outside.
Oh my God.
But eventually she calmed, but she would never again go near anybody else except for me. From that point forward, never again. Just lashed out, scratched, hissed, growled, whatever, and anybody else. So it's just, I don't know if it was that thing necessarily, because I don't think she had any of those other symptoms, but it was crazy time.
Very complicated. I've made a point of studying unpredictable randomized aggression in cats that are otherwise friendly. And it's a poorly understood, not well studied, complicated subject. There can be triggers that are not seen, but can sometimes be identified. Sound can be a trigger. I knew a cat who became aggressive when the owner was scraping the litter box. And you see other cats that become aggressive when you're like messing with a plastic bag or a paper bag. And all of these are kind of high frequency sounds that sound like hissing, potentially. And for some cats, it might be triggering because it's referential to a hiss.
Right.
Other triggers are not seen, but I believe that there always is a trigger. We just don't always know what it is. And I have my own hypothesis as to what can be going on with these cats, but it's a complicated and heart-wrenching situation. The human feline bond is being broken by the animal that you love and that has loved you. And I think there are few things as difficult for a cat parent as this particular issue.
So we kind of discussed, situational things that can lead to rehoming a cat. Is a cat's aggressive behavior the biggest reason? Is there also litter box issues that could lead to it? The question, I guess I asked it more from the point of view of the human. So I want to kind of ask it from the point of view of the cat. Cat-related behaviors that can lead to, like you said, it not matching.
So looking at cats that are surrendered to ACC, to the Animal Care Centers of New York City, and I read the reports of all the cats that come into our Manhattan shelter when I'm there working. And from the behavioral point of view of the cat itself, there really are two primary reasons. And that is cat aggression, either cat on human aggression or cat on cat aggression, and litter box issues. Those represent the vast majority of all of it. Cat on human aggression, more common by far than cat on cat aggression. Cats who scratch or bite a person in the home. I don't know how many times it doesn't lead to surrender, and presumably many times it does not. I mean, we've all been scratched at one point or another, even accidentally, by our cat, and we would never think of surrendering their cat. But there are lots of cats who are surrendered because of a single bite incident or a single scratch incident. Sometimes serious, sometimes not serious. Litter box issues are another concern, which again can be fixed.
Right.
But people often reach that breaking point. We offer surrender prevention, counseling for people and resources. But when people reach that breaking point where the cork kind of pops, they aren't ready. They're not open to help at that point. They've made a decision that they can't retreat from at that point. But those are the two biggest reasons: aggression and litter box.
And there's no convincing them once they've reached that point.
Sometimes, but frequently not.
What happens to the cat? How does the cat cope with losing their home? Because they didn't realize, I shouldn't have scratched them. Maybe I wouldn't be back here. What happens to the cat? How does the cat cope? Can you even answer that question?
Yes, I can. On a general level. So I tell it as kind of a story, kind of jokingly, that if we had an adoption room and all the cats on this side of the room were surrendered and all the cats on that side of the room were found as strays, and the average adopter comes in and they look around and they see all these well-adjusted cats over here and these upset cats over here, and they point to the well-adjusted cats and they go, oh, those are the ones that must have come from a home. And oftentimes, and this is not universally true, but oftentimes the cats who are well-adjusted were strays. They now have a nice place, multiple meals a day, plus food when they want it, and enrichment and human care, and they're safe and everything is fine. And the cats who came from the homes are often upset. But here's maybe the more important point. That is only true maybe 50% of the time. I have exaggerated to make a point, which is the assumption that people make. But the truth is more nuanced. There are a lot of cats, this is to me really interesting. A lot of cats come from someone's home and they are immediately super well adjusted in the shelter, in a small kennel, able to hear barking dogs in the distance, and they are fine. There are other cats who are not, and they need a decompression period, and they often get better within a few days. And it is a mystery to me on a certain level as to why my cat who loves me could be okay without me. But Cricket, who is one of my two cats, I adopted her because I was standing next to her all day at an adoption event. And she was just like, everything's good. And nothing phases this cat.
Totally chill.
Yes, there are lots of good things that happen in her life that she's used to and that she might miss if they weren't there, but she's a very tranquil cat. Then with the strays, some of them are not okay when they come into the shelter. They actually are upset, not necessarily because of being in the shelter, but just because they are stressed out or fearful cats. So I guess the answer to your question, what's it like for them, is it depends on the cat, their temperament, their prior experiences, and we get all sorts of reaction.
It's a very, I think as painful a subject as coping with loss from illness. Maybe more because, it's like a breakup. The cat is still out there, and the cat. Is there a percentage of those cats that find better homes? In your experience with in what you exactly where you are, how many of those cats then do most of them find good homes? Has there been a second instance of surrender that you've ever experienced?
Yes, there has been multiple instances of surrendering the same cat. And I put more of that on us in terms of trying to find a good match. But yeah, one of the things I forgot to mention, which is that one of the fears people have, and this is generally true, but also true with cats who were adopted from ACC, which is that if I bring my cat back, it might be euthanized. And so one of the things that I'm able to help gratefully counsel people on in my work at ACC is we don't euthanize cats or dogs for space. There's no ticking clock, right? We don't go, we're out of kennel space, someone's got to go. That used to be true. It's not true now. And cats are effectively not euthanized for behavior. We have so many different placement options for cats that even cats who just can't thrive in a home have other options. And that's why we work with our New Hope partners, of which we have several hundred within a couple 100 miles of New York City, where sometimes cats go to a farm or a barn, or working cats. A feral cat wants nothing to do with people. And so you could we have a feral cat in a brewery in Brooklyn, and it's perfectly safe. It's not going to bother anybody because it doesn't want to be around people.
And there's
it
beer.
Gets to live it, right? We should name a beer after a cat. So there are lots of different options for cats. And so it's important for people, at least in my shelter, to understand that behavior in space is not a problem. And did I ignore a related question? Because I knew I needed to make that point.
No.
Okay.
Is there?
Well, it was finding good homes. Yeah. So I feel my sense is that they kind of all find better places to live. That's what we do. That's what we work so hard at ACC, is to keep working on behalf of our cats and our dogs.
Have the clients ever asked you what happened to the cat? And have you then been able to say, hey, just so you know, they ended up with a great family, so you did the right thing? Has that ever happened?
All the time. We all tell them we can give them updates if they want them. If they don't want them, we won't offer, and we won't obviously tell them the name of the family or the name, exactly where they went, but we will give them updates. I have a client, I think of her as a client right now, who her first cat that she adopted from us was randomly bitey and was not a good match. And I was able to tell her last week that cat got adopted into a new home and is thriving. And she then adopted a cat who is what's called a DOH victim, a Department of Health victim cat. This is a cat who is bitten by another animal and has to go on a 6-month quarantine. But that quarantine can take place in one's home. You just have to kind of do a virtual vet visit every month. And she adopted this amazing cat named Lily. And I get pictures and videos almost every day, and this cat is doing great. So first cat is in a new home and doing well. She's got a new and super loving cat that's a great match. It happens all the time.
So is there just to kind of put a good cap on this painful subject, is there one overarching piece of advice that you can give to people that are facing this situation? Is there one kind of nugget of advice you can give to people that might be listening to this? And we'll plug your website. We definitely will. If there's one big thing you could tell people to take away from this subject that I've learned something about today, what would that be?
Get counseling before you feel the decision has been made. That means going back to your shelter, your rescue group, talking to them. Yeah, sure, you can seek outside help from people like me, but in some ways, your first point of contact is probably the shelter or rescue group that you adopted from. But getting counseling addresses everything that we've talked about today. It addresses all the emotions that we feel. It addresses the hope that one might want to try and make the situation better. And by living with the problem alone, I kind of sometimes joke a little bit that, dog owners, these are publicly facing animals and they get help. There are lots and lots and lots of dog trainers because dogs go on walks and they go to dog parks. And if your dog has poor manners, you got to get help because you're out there in the public. People who have cats suffer quietly and alone. And so what I would say, Dan, in answer to that question is don't sit quietly with the problem, not knowing what to do, trying to game it out in your own head and having kind of catastrophic conversations with yourself. Seek counseling from someone who can help you.
I think it's a very, very, very good piece of advice. And any reputable rescue group or shelter will have in the adoption contract that they'll take the cat back for any reason. And if you don't see that, that's a red flag, because in every rescue I've ever dealt with that's always been, we will take this back for any reason, no questions asked.
And if the person you're talking to is not compassionate, you shouldn't be talking to them.
Well, you are compassionate, Stephen. You are our resident cat behavior expert. So you'll be on much more without pomp and circumstance because you're part of the team now. But your website is to seek you out for counseling. Your website is
catbehaviorhelp.com. And the press section has lots and lots of articles and periodicals that I've contributed to on many topics. So it's like a library of stuff. You don't just have to go to my website because of one-on-one counseling. I also give public webinars on cat behavior that are free to the public. I give them usually through public libraries, and those are usually linked on my website as well. But yeah, I'm glad to be a part of the team. It's sweet. And I can only imagine that next you're going to ask me to do my own imitation of certain cat vocalizations, like chittering.
I mean, we did kind of talk about that last time, Stephen.
I think it did come up last time.
Time.
That might be an entire episode in and of itself. Pressuring Stephen to do impressions with Stephen Quandt. And along those lines, we're in the planning stages of our first YouTube Q&A, which, Stephen, was your idea, so credit to you.
Mm-hmm.
I spend 99% of my free time watching YouTube, and they all do it. All the YouTube channels I watch and do Q&As, and my YouTube is travel, because I don't travel, car repair, because I don't have a car, and tech, because I do repair MacBooks as a hobby. So at least one out of the three I do. I like to watch people travel. I don't want to go anywhere. I like to watch people rebuild old cars. In fact, I've invited two of my favorite YouTube automotive influencers because they have a lot of cats in their shop as they're rebuilding these cars. And I've befriended two of them.
Alternative placement.
And they love having cats, and the cats, they live in rural parts of the country. I said, it would be great to talk about what you do and why you have so many cats. So those are future episodes. But they all do Q&As, and they're all relatively successful. So we're planning one for the spring where people could ask our resident cat behavior expert those questions.
I love it. In my webinars, they're live, and I do half of it is a Q&A. I've had webinars where I've had 100 guests, and they all were asking their questions, and it's like speed dating. We just, we do the best we can in a minute or two. Or guide them to resources that they can look at afterwards. But I love Q&A.
So that's definitely coming up, where we want to give you the listeners an opportunity to ask these questions in a live setting, and we'll have that as well. And we could do several of them. That's Delilah, right?
No,
that's Munch.
This is Munchichi.
She got so big.
She's huge.
How old is she
That's
now?
so big. So we think that she was born, I'm going to say June. So yeah, when I
6
first
months.
got her, I brought her to the vet in October. She thought she was maybe 4 months old. So October, November, December, January. So 7 months. 7 months basically.
Man, she is huge compared to
She's gotten so big.
She's beautiful. You know, except for one, all mine are gray tabbies. You seem to have a type.
I have a very formal household here. They're both tuxedos.
My last 4
Hey,
cats were gray tabbies, and one of my friends said, "What do you only take in gray tabbies?"
I have to promise the next time I'm on that I'll bring at least one of my cats on the.
Yeah, do you even have any? We haven't seen or heard any of them.
Yeah, they're all over my website.
I know the blind on your shoulders that's your thumbnail.
Jenny.
Your thumbnail for the previous episode you were on.
Right.
Well, Stephen, I could talk to you all day and night. Michelle and I have talked about moving into your home because we just like talking to you about cats. But you might find that awkward. But thank you.
Maybe.
I mean, not the fact that Dan comes with 6 cats. I come with 2. And possibly 4 basement cats that I'm housing at the moment. A friend is in the process of rescuing these 4 colony cats that he cares for. And while, getting them tested and vaccinated and stuff, we housed them temporarily in my basement. So we're in the trapping phase of getting them. It's been a bit more complicated than it was supposed to be, than it should have been, really.
That will be the subject of a future episode. Michelle's halfway house of cats. Stephen, these were amazing, very important points. I learned a lot today. So thank you so much for this. You're a valuable addition to the team. I don't know anything. I'm just comic relief. Michelle has intuitive insight and a much better voice than I do. From her acting background. I have a raspy Brooklyn nasal voice. She has a much more commanding, more pleasant voice. You bring expert advice and experience with ACC, which I think is vital to the show. So I think it makes a great balance for the 3 of us. So I learned a lot, and I cannot thank you enough.
I love being here, and I look forward to more episodes. Just to mention, Instagram and Facebook at Cat Behavior Help, and the website catbehaviorhelp.com.
You have great reels on your Instagram. The one with the big cheese, the orange cat.
The big cheese. What a great cat.
I would have taken the big cheese if I had space. And luckily, by the time you posted it, Big Cheese found the home. I think you told me, right?
Yeah. It can happen very quickly. So yes, we do a lot of adoptions at ACC. It's really great. Yesterday was a banner day. It's like the post-holiday bump. We had so many, including senior cats and big cats. We had a 17-pound cat go home.
Holy mackerel.
A 10-year-old and a 14-year-old went home. It's magic.
Awesome. I don't know where he is. I'm the proud owner of an ACC veteran who's maybe 17, maybe 15. He's up there, but he's amazing. I love him to death, and I'm so happy I took him in from there.
Someday, Dan, before too long, I'd love to give either of you or both of you a tour of our new pet adoption center at 110th Street. It's a brand new state-of-the-art building, and it would be a pleasure to show you around.
Absolutely, and Michelle will drive me, but we would absolutely love to. I volunteered her. That would be...
Thanks, Dan.
Are we able to record? Are we able to film?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure, absolutely.
Even better. Sweet, we have our first outing, Michelle.
We could do an episode from there.
Absolutely. Great stuff. Thank you so much. This has been a great episode. I learned a lot, and welcome aboard.
Thank you. My pleasure. Great seeing you both again and spending time together.
Thanks, Stephen.
And we will see you all in the next episode. Bye for now.
Bye.